Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today we're going to look at a game from the 1975 Soviet Championship between Vladimir K. Dorishkevich with the white pieces and Mikhail Tal with the black pieces. Just a quick background on this tournament. In 1975, you had somewhat of a crossing over of the old school generation chess players from the 50s and 60s. So you had players like Tao, Petrosian in the tournament participating. But then you had the younger generation players now participating that were coming of age. So you had players like Lev Albert, for example, and Boris Gulko. And actually, Boris Gulko was winning this tournament with by 1.5 points, I believe, with about 4 rounds to go, and he lost to Polgaevsky, and then he wound up losing, I think, 2 rounds later to the winner, who was Petrosian. This would be Petrosian's fourth Soviet chess championship. Tao actually wound up coming in fourth. There were a bunch of players, I believe 4, that had 9.5, and Petrosian was able to win with 10.5. So very competitive the tournament, as you could expect the Soviet chess championship to be, especially back in those days where the Soviets absolutely dominated chess. That might as well have been a candidate's match. So we're going to look at this game. I believe it was from round 11. So the game started off d4 by Dorishkevich, who was rated 24-25 at the time. Tao was rated 26-45. g6, so we see this modern flexible defense by Tao. Bishop g7, e4. Right, typical big center. And now we're going to see the game transpose into a Benoni like structure. d5, d6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop e2, castle, and f4. So now we have, what can we call this? A modern Benoni 4 pawns attack. All right. One thing that seems to be missing is probably the rook e8. So e6, typical Benoni move right here, challenging the center. And this is just one of those typical themes, right, of the hypermodern play, putting piece pressure against the pawns, right, the big pawn preponderance in the center of white. So the battle and the argument at hand is, can white hold on to his huge space advantage and consolidate and end up with an advantage due to all of his space and extra mobility that it affords? Or will black be able to tear down this center and show it as just a liability? And so this is an argument in these type of positions. E takes d5, c takes d5, bishop g4, castle, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3. So what does black get by relinquishing the bishop pair? Well, by removing that knight on f3, black makes it a little bit more difficult for white to achieve the e5 advance, which is often so critical in the Benoni. So by exchanging that knight off on f3, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Or also having less space in the position, he's also getting rid of a piece, right, and thus relieving the cramped nature of the position somewhat. And this is why you'll see in some variations of the Benoni where white will play an early h3 in order to keep the bishop from being able to just trade itself off at f3. But we can see we've reached here by transposition. So that's one of the benefits of being able to transpose, is that you might be able to sometimes trick your opponent into going into a inferior variation of a certain line instead of going right for that line directly. So knight b7, right? And we can see that there's pressure on against e5. And king h1. All right, so just getting off the dark squares, and we'll see that white has this plan involving g4 at some point. So perhaps this is why he wanted to get his king off that diagonal also. A normal looking move would be like queen b3 or something like that, right? And then queen c7, bishop e3, looking pretty equal. So king h1 was played, a6. This is all typical Benoni stuff, right? Threatening to expand on the queen side, right? That's one of the plans of the Benoni, expand on the queen side. Another plan is also just to fight directly in the center with moves like rook e8. White chooses bishop e3. Another critical move is a4, right? Anticipating this advance on the queen side and basically throwing a monkey wrench in the strategy. Now that comes with its drawbacks, because as you can see, a4 weakens the b4 square and the b3 square in white's position. Okay, so it's not like a4 is just this fantastic move. It has its drawbacks also. Bishop e3, just developing a piece. And Tao plays rook e8. All right. Now, for instance, b5 is another plan. So let's look at that real quick. So b5, for example, and let's say a4, and this will give you what type of ideas that black has in the position. So a4, white is threatening to win a pawn here. b4 is a typical move. And let's say knight b1 with the idea of going to d2 and then c4, right? Let's say that's like the general plan. Well, black has tactics, and again, when you're playing the opening like this is black, where white is allowed to build up his big center, you have to be tactically proficient, because you need to be able to recognize the opportunities when they appear on the board. Because if you miss the opportunity, then white will be able to be one step closer to strengthening and solidifying his center. So after knight b1, although the bishop is on f3, protecting the pawn on e4, black is able to take. So for instance, knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen e7, and you can see the reason why this works is because the bishop on e3 is also unprotected. All right, so it puts white in a situation where he really can't, he doesn't have time to protect both pieces. So that's the downside in this position of this bishop being here on e3 like this. It allows this tactic right here. So knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen e7, and you can see the pressure down the e file. You can also see the power of the bishop on g7. And play can continue, say queen d3, right, trying to protect himself. Bishop takes b2. Play can continue, rook a2, rook fe8. That's putting more pressure down, and this is good for black. Another continuation could be just knight d2. Some players will give up that rook on a1, right, with the idea of trying to exploit the weakness left behind on the dark squares by black. So bishop takes a1, rook takes, again, rook fe8. And although the bishop on e4 is protected, the problem is bishop on e3 is not adequately protected. So now, say for instance rook e1, then a move like f5, and then you have bishop f3 here, and now the problem is the rook on e1. So it's just pin after pin after pin here. And then you also have these pawns on the queen side for black. So I know some of you out there are curious and saying, hey, it looks like black would be okay here after, say, a move like bishop f2, for example, right? And how is black going to get the piece back? Now, this is where we talk about compensation here. Now, after bishop f3, let's give black a move, for example, knight b6, okay, attacking the a pawn. So black has the pawns rolling, right, on the b and c files. But let's say right here, white does bishop f2. So bishop f2, hey, I still have my piece. Now, black has a tremendous move here. Queen takes e1. Check. Bishop takes e1. Rook takes e1. Now, some of you are saying, hey, why knight f1 and now what? The problem is the pawns in the limited space now that white has. So after c4, there's no way for the queen to adequately protect the knight on f1. And these type of positions are loaded with tactics. And this is why I think Tao enjoyed this opening for many years playing Benoni systems, is because of the wealth of tactical opportunities. It just suited his style. But again, you have to be very strong tactically so that you would be able to detect these opportunities when they arise in the position. So even going back here after bishop f2, I'm sorry, we know bishop f2 is a mistake. So let's say just a5, right, protecting the pawn, and knight a4. And black again has great compensation. Black is actually a little bit better, right? It's just very difficult for white to move. All right, so going back again to this idea with b5, a4 again, b4, and instead of knight b1, right, we just looked at this, right, and how this idea was refuted by that move. What about move like knight e2? And knight e2 will meet the same fate. Knight e2, bishop takes e4, queen e7, knight g3, and move like f5 can be played, knight f6. Basically the same ideas as we just showed you. So white has to be very careful with these, having these big centers, because with the big center comes big responsibility. All right, so this move is not easy to just throw out there. So perhaps a little more conservative will be a move like rook e1. See, now that we know the ideas, now we know the better move for white. Rook e1, rook e8, and the game can continue, in an equal fashion back and forth. And this would be like the type of modern play. Both sides developing the pieces, and this is what it would look like if black pursued the plan on the queen side. White will be pursuing his attack in the center. All right, so it could look like this: e5. This is typical thematic stuff, right? Sacrifice the pawn on the e file to advance d6, and play f5. Again, dynamic equality for both sides. And notice too, it makes sense for white to want to start opening up the position, since he has the two bishops, right? As the position opens up, the two bishops get stronger and stronger in their future prospects. All right, so that is your little lesson on b5 there, right? That's what it will look like. That's just one idea. So Tao went with the more straightforward classical idea of rook e8, just pressuring the center directly, which is again goes hand in hand with the move bishop to g4 and taking the knight on f3. Because the idea, it's an old idea that was eloquently explained by Nimzovich, that basically you want to arrest the pawn, right? That he talked about past pawns, right, being like a runaway prisoner, that they must be captured, they must be blocked, captured, and destroyed, right? He was like real dramatic about it. But it applies to these huge pawn centers, right? The pawn center must be fixed because it doesn't make sense to attack a moving target, because when you set your sights on the target to attack and it can just move, then you have to move and keep reattacking. It doesn't make sense. So what makes sense is that you freeze the target, keep it from moving, and then you start attacking. So this is basically what happened. Bishop takes f3. So now it's difficult for white to play a move like e5, and now he's just building up on the e4 square. So after rook e8, white engages on a quite ambitious plan and plays a move g4. And what I'm thinking is Dorishkevich said, you know what, I'm going to attack Tao before he attacks me. Right? Everybody knows Tao's attacking players. So he's like, you know what, I'm just going to, we're going to have a gunfight. I'm going to attack him before he attacks me. So he plays g4. Again, more conservative ideas would just be like a4, for example. Play can, continue queen a5, and rook e1, knight b6. And this is a good example here of what I talked about earlier, how the move a4 has its own issues as far as white is concerned. So for example, you do delay the move b5 from black. However, you create weaknesses that black can exploit, namely on the dark squares. So a move like queen a5 in this sample line is good. And let's say rook e1, knight b6, let's say queen e2, and rook a c8, bishop d2, knight goes to d7, knight b d7, king g1, and c4, bishop e3, knight c5. And this is typical ideas in the Benoni. And all the arrows and colored boxes just indicate the various possibilities that black has in the position, right? There's pressure on the e pawn. You can see in this position 3 pieces, right? The knight on c5 has b3 that it can go to, d3. So a4 has to be considered very carefully. It's not a move you just throw out there, even though you see it a lot in blitz. Another idea again is just rook e1, allowing b5. Let's say bishop f2. Again, in this variation, notice that the white is protecting his center properly. So moves like h5, rook c1, b4. And again, with play for both sides. All right, so rook e1 and a4. Whoops, sorry about that. So in this position, a4, rook e1, right? Decent candidates. Back to the game, g4 was played. h6 by Tao, obviously preventing, well, not preventing, but with the idea of capturing on g5. And g5 was played. Now, to me, it's a little bit ambitious because after g5 is played and Tao captures, white basically is abandoning the e5 square here. But he has a good reason for doing this. And again, you'll see. This is why this game to me is a great game, because it looks like it's all good for white, but you'll see. So g5 again, move like a4 could have been played here, and we went over a4 a bunch of times. Again, typical play here, right? Black fighting on the queen side with white playing a4, a5, just slowing up black's queen side activity, and then forcing the game to come to the center squares. Again, this is dynamically equal. So a4 is possibility. But g5 is played. Tao takes. H takes g5. And here's white's idea. White's idea is not to play g takes right, and give up the e5 square like that. So for instance, if he did play white play f takes g5, play could continue knight h7, the double attack on the g pawn. Play could continue h5. I'm sorry, h4, or the play could continue queen d2 also. But basically, the idea is to protect the g pawn, right? The knight is kind of frozen on h7, out of play a little bit. Knight e5, queen e2, and you can see that white's king is a little bit drafty here, a little bit exposed. Bishop f4, thematic move in the Benoni c4, bishop g2, and this provides outpost for the knight on d3. Bishop e3, bishop e5, and you can see that exploitation of the dark squares by the bishop on e5. Rook a b1, f6, and this starts to turn in black's favor, right? Just due to all the holes in the white position, right? And you can see again the downside of the big center. How this is the ugly side of having the big center, because those pawns are just basically blocking the light square bishop on g2. Right, they're just liabilities now. They have to be protected. They're not really providing any possibilities or attack. They're not being used as outposts for knights or anything like that. They're just kind of in the way, and they're targets for black later on. And his king side is weak to boot. So after h takes g5 here, Doris Kavich went with his plan, and again, this is like typical kind of Benoni stuff where you would sacrifice a pawn and then play e5, right? The idea, of course, to gain more space. Sometimes open up the king side. Sometimes you sacrifice for moves like f5, things of that nature. But here is, I believe, where the monkey wrench is thrown in the position. All right. So e5 is played, and I think at this moment, Doris Kavich, is calculated. This right here, d takes e5, f takes g5, hitting the knight, knight h7, and then knight e4. Knight e4, of course, accomplishes the same task of protecting the pawn, along with the bishop on e3, so it protects the pawn on g5, and now you have this passed pawn on d5. Again, this is very typical of Benoni setups and play, and this looks decent for white. Not that white is winning or anything, but this is respectable. The position starts opening up. White has the two bishops, all right, and so now he has a knight on h7 passively placed. So now it looks like white's dreams are coming true. Now, if you look at the other possibility here in the position, that if, for instance, after e5, let's say g takes f4, for example, all right, then white just wins the piece, because after g takes f4, then white just simply plays e takes f6, right? And let's say rook takes e3, f takes g7, and guess who's up a piece? White is just up a minor piece, isn't he? Where's the compensation here? So we're here at this move, e5. And Tal made a brilliant move. And again, this is 1975. So this is 15 years after Tal is world champion. Remember, Tal was world champion in 1960 at the height of his power. So this is 15 years later. And he's showing, man, that hey, I'm still going to take you out into that deep forests, and drown you in these tactics. That's basically, he's saying I still got it here. And Tal did. indeed sacrificed this piece, man. He played G takes F4 and probably, surprised Dorishkevich because he's probably thinking, hey, I'm just going to win a piece here. E takes F6, Rook takes, F takes G7, Tau follows up with Knight E5. And what's great about this move is that there's no immediate, there's not like an immediate, threat to capture, to win back the piece. It's not like he moves the knight and there's like a check and then he's like, yeah, I got my piece back. It's none of that. It's just a positional move. Knight E5, just putting more pressure on the position. And so Dorishkevich plays the move Bishop G2. All right, he's just basically trying to consolidate here. Okay. I'll just give some examples of what kind of possibilities are in the position. So let's say Bishop E2, for example. F3. Okay, we take the pawn, right? Bishop takes F3 because white would love to just trade out at this point, being a piece up. But Queen H4 with a very simple idea. King takes G7, and then the other rook on A8 will come to the H file. So, for example, Bishop E4. Then this rook takes C3. And you can see how many, the tactics, right? Getting rid of the protector of the bishop. And queen takes E4. Check, king G1. And this is good for black. Black is winning here. King G7, for example. Right, with the same kind of idea that I mentioned earlier. What are the possibilities here? Let's say just rook C1, right? Then the idea is to play move like rook C2 and get this rook involved, right? We want to get as many pieces out as possible in front of the king, right? So rook C1, again, same idea. Queen H4. Let's say rook C2, right? Protecting the second rank. But now, again, more tactics. Knight takes F3. Now the problem here is if rook takes F3 and rook E1 check. And now since the rook is on C2, the queen is vulnerable to this fork situation from the rook. So it's very difficult for black in this position, for white in this position to make a reasonable move. So now you can understand why he would just do a move like Bishop G2, right? Trying not to do any harm. Tau plays Queen G5. Now, as you saw from the variation before, Queen H4 was better, right? But he plays Queen G5, which is natural looking move, right? He plays Queen G5, but this allows white to hit his queen with Knight E4, right? Gaining a little bit of counterplay there. So he should have just went the queen H4 right away, which he does. It's kind of like he corrects the mistake, but white has an extra tempo as a result, right? He moved the knight from C3 to a central position, the E4. Queen D2. And now we see this idea. King takes G7. And now the rook wants to come to H8, as said before. But we can see white's idea with Queen D2 is to play this move, Queen F2, and just trade off everything. So Queen takes F2, Rook takes F2. Right? And I'll give you an example. If he played Knight takes F2 here, and just F3. Let's say Bishop H3, Rook to E2. Say Knight G4 again, want to trade off. Knight takes, Bishop takes, Rook H8. Again, there's no defense, no proper defense here. Bishop takes F3, Rook H takes H2, King G1, Rook takes A4 and F5, and black is winning. with his pawn preponderance. It's just amazing how the activity it's the activity of black that saves the day. It's not really the threats to win back material like right away. It's just that black is so active. It's hard for white to move. Of course, if a move like H3, then just simply F5. Okay. So no need to rub it in any further. Okay. So let's go back a little bit. So okay, so right here, bishop G2, queen G5, and now we're back to where we were. Knight E4, queen H4. So queen D2, queens come off the board. And like I said, rook takes F2 was played. And now F3. And this is why I showed you the variation when knight takes F2 if he tried to preserve the piece. So now it's F3 here. So now black is going to get his piece back. So knight takes D6. Rook D8, attacking the knight. Knight takes B7. And now black gets his piece back, and he's clearly winning. If it wasn't clear to you before, king takes G2. Rook takes D5. And B3. The idea here with B3 from white is that the black has the idea of C4 because that knight on B7 is in a very precarious position and close to being trapped. So the idea here is like for black, let's give black an extra move. The idea here for black is to play a move like knight D3, for example, rook D2, and then C4. And as you can see, the knight on B7 doesn't really have anywhere to go. You know, king F1, and then like a move like rook E7. Something like that. White also has to be careful about being mated also. So that was the idea behind this B3 move by white, like a last-ditch effort. Knight D3 happened anyway. And then rook C2. And then Tao found a great coup d'etat at the end and just play rook E1. Challenging the undeveloped rook on A1. So just forcing the win of material. Of course, after rook takes E1, knight takes E1 check, forking the king and the rook on E2. I'm sorry, on C2, and winning the game. So that's a fantastic game that I just came across during my chess studies, and I wanted to share with you. I hope you enjoyed that game. Please get in the comments. Let me know what you think about the game, about Tao as a player. Also, please hit the like button, and also check the links below in the box. There's some donation links if you want to support the channel, and I also put books and DVDs related to the specific opening that we discussed in the video. If you're interested, and if you have any questions, just put them in the comment box below. And again, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys on the next video.